before I tell you what happened, I have to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where one single moment changed everything? A moment so sharp, so unforgiving, that it cut straight through your life and split it into two parts, before and after? If you have, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. Let me know if you've ever felt that kind of regret, that kind of unshakable guilt. And if you're here because you love real, raw, and shocking stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga, because this is just the beginning. They say some moments haunt you forever. Not just for a day, not just for a year, but forever. And the worst part? You don't see them coming. You don't get a warning. No flashing red lights. No eerie music in the background, hinting that your life is about to take a turn you can never undo. No, it happens in an instant. 1 second, everything is normal. The next, the air feels different. Your heart starts pounding. And before you even understand what's happening, your world is splitting in two. That's exactly what happened to me. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years since I lost something I can never get back. 2 years since my father walked in and saw something that wasn't meant for his eyes. I still remember the look on his face. The way his whole body tensed up. The way his hand, still gripping the doorknob, went stiff, like he had just walked into a nightmare. His eyes, God, his eyes, went from confusion to realization in a matter of seconds. And then, horror. And me? I just froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was like my whole body had turned to stone, like maybe if I stood still enough, if I just didn't react, I could rewind time. Make it not real. Make it go away. But that's the thing about life. It doesn't pause. It doesn't let you take things back. The damage was already done. And the worst part? I never thought it would happen like this. And I never thought he would be the one to witness it. But before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand how I got here. Because no one wakes up one morning and just decides to destroy everything. It's never that simple. It happens little by little, choice by choice, step by step. And sometimes, by the time you realize what you've done, it's already too late. I used to believe my father was the one person who could see through me. He always had this way of knowing when something was wrong, even when I tried to hide it. When I was little, he could take one look at my face and tell if I had a bad day at school. When I was a teenager, he knew when I was lying about where I had been, even before I opened my mouth. And when I got older, when I got married and started pretending I was happy, he saw through that too. But I never thought he'd see this. Never thought he'd be the one to catch me in the kind of moment that can never be erased. But before that night, before everything shattered, my life was just quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind of quiet where you can sit back, breathe deep, and feel at ease. No, my life was the kind of quiet that feels hollow. The kind where you walk into a house that's supposed to be a home, but it feels more like an empty space you just happen to live in. I'm Chloe. I was 32, married, and if I'm being honest, I had been lonely for a long time. My husband was distant. Not in the obvious, dramatic way that you see in movies, where the man comes home at 3 a.m. smelling like another woman. No, my husband's distance was subtle. Slow. It crept in over time, like a slow leak you don't notice until your whole house is flooded. At first, it was just little things. The way he'd scroll through his phone instead of looking at me when I spoke. The way he'd brush off my touch like it was nothing more than static electricity. The way his kisses went from something warm, something real, to something that felt like a habit. Something he did just because he had to. Then, it got worse. He stopped asking about my day. Stopped noticing when I was hurting. Stopped seeing me at all. It was like I had become furniture in my own marriage, something that was just there, something to be sat on, leaned against, but never really felt. And the worst part? I stopped fighting it. I stopped trying to pull him back, stopped trying to make him love me the way he used to. Because after a while, you just get tired. Tired of reaching out only to grab at air. Tired of wanting something that isn't there anymore. So, I got quiet. I did what every woman in my position does. I told myself it was fine. That I had a good life. That marriage wasn't about passion or warmth or being seen. That love fades, and that's just how it is. But even as I told myself those things, I could feel something inside me withering. And then, there was my father. If my marriage was distant, my father was even further away. He wasn't always like that. Growing up, my dad was my rock. The kind of man who never raised his voice, who always knew exactly what to say when the world felt like too much. He was the man who held me in his arms when I cried over my first heartbreak, who whispered, "You deserve more than this." But after my mother died, something in him just broke. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't grieve the way I thought he would. He just shut down. One day, he was my father, the man who always had an answer, always had a steady hand to guide me. And the next? He was a shadow. A man who barely spoke, who spent more time staring out the window than engaging with the world. It was like he had left with her, like he had gone with my mother, even though his body was still here. For months, I tried to reach him. I called. I visited. I sat beside him on his couch and begged him to talk to me. But nothing worked. He just wasn't there anymore. Eventually, I stopped trying. And that was life. A husband who didn't see me. A father who had disappeared into his own silence. And me, floating somewhere between them, unseen by both. Until that night. The night my father showed up at my house, unexpected, after weeks of not speaking to me. The night my husband, as usual, had left for another business trip. The night the air felt different. I didn't know it then. Didn't know that my whole world was about to shift. That the man I had spent my whole life looking up to was about to see a part of me I never wanted anyone to see. Didn't know that by the time the night was over, I'd be left with nothing but regret. That night started like any other. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. Nothing that should have warned me, should have stopped me. My husband had left earlier than usual for another one of his business trips. 5th one in 2 months. I didn't even ask where he was going this time. Didn't ask when he'd be back. Because what was the point? I already knew the answer would be the same. Just a couple of days. Work's been crazy. And I would nod. Like always. Pretending not to notice the suitcase packed with more clothes than a man needs for 2 days. Pretending not to feel the space between us growing wider, colder, until it felt like we were living on 2 different planets. So I did what I always did. I stayed home. Alone. Until the knock at the door. It was soft. Hesitant. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure if they were supposed to be there. I wasn't expecting anyone. And when I opened the door, and I saw him, my father, standing there, shoulders hunched against the night air, eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place, my heart stuttered. He looked older than I remembered. His face, once strong and sure, had hollowed out. His skin looked tired, stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. His eyes, once steady, always knowing, seemed distant. Wandering. Like he was searching for something he couldn't name. "Dad?" I said, surprised, stepping aside. "What are you doing here?" For a moment, he just looked at me. Like he wasn't sure himself. Then, with a small sigh, he stepped inside. "Thought I'd drop by." His voice was quiet. Deeper than I remembered. "Haven't seen you in a while." A simple statement. But it felt heavier than that. Like he wasn't just talking about time, but about something deeper. Something neither of us had the courage to say out loud. I closed the door behind him. And for the first time in a long time, it was just me and him. No distractions. No phone calls. No empty conversations where we pretended everything was fine. Just us. In the quiet. I led him to the living room. Poured him a drink. Poured myself one too. Not that I needed it, but suddenly my throat felt dry. I didn't know what to say. Because what do you say to someone who used to be your whole world, but now feels like a stranger? So, I said the first thing that came to mind. "Have you been?" A simple question. One I already knew the answer to. He gave a half shrug. Took a sip of his drink. Same as always. Meaning, not great. We sat there, sipping our drinks, the silence stretching between us. And then, he said something that made my chest tighten. "You ever feel like..." He paused, rolling the glass in his hands. "Like you're watching your life happen from the outside? Like, you're there, but you're not really there. I swallowed. Because God, yes. That was my whole life. But I didn't say that. Instead, I gave a small nod. Yeah. My voice came out quieter than I intended. All the time. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Like he saw something in my face that reflected his own pain. Marriage is funny, isn't it? His voice was tired. Not bitter. Just worn out. I let out a breathy laugh. Yeah. Funny. We sat there, the warmth of the drink settling between us, letting the weight of those words linger. And for the first time in years, we talked. Not just surface-level pleasantries. Not just how's work or been keeping busy. No. We talked about real things. About loneliness. About how it creeps in slowly, so slowly that you don't even realize it's there until it's settled deep in your bones. About how it doesn't matter if you're married, doesn't matter if you share a bed with someone every night. Loneliness doesn't care. It finds you anyway. We talked about my mother. About how her absence still weighed on him, still left him feeling like half a man. And I told him things I had never said out loud before. How my marriage felt like a house with all the windows shut, stale air, no warmth, no light. How I had spent years convincing myself that this was normal, that this was just how love fades. And then, there was a moment. It was small, barely there. But I felt it. A shift in the air. Something about the way he looked at me lingered a second too long. Not in a way that should have meant anything. But somehow it did. And something inside me, something dangerous, something reckless, stirred. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in so damn long, someone was seeing me. Or maybe it wasn't him that was different that night. Maybe it was me. I should have looked away. I should have shaken it off, laughed, changed the subject, done something, anything, to break whatever was happening in that moment. But I didn't. I sat there, staring back at him, feeling something I had no business feeling. And the worst part? I liked it. I liked the way his eyes lingered, like I wasn't just someone he knew, but someone he saw. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that. Since anyone had looked through me, into the parts of me I kept hidden, the parts that ached for something I couldn't even name. And that's when the guilt crept in. Thick. Heavy. Clawing at the edges of my mind, whispering, "What the hell is wrong with you?" This was my father. The man who had raised me, who had held my hand through every storm, who had been there when no one else was. Why was I feeling this way? Why did my chest feel tight, my skin feel hot, my breath feel uneven? Why was my heart pounding like I was waiting for something? I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze away, gripping my glass tighter like it could somehow ground me, like it could drown out the thoughts screaming in my head. I should check on dinner, I muttered, standing too quickly, needing to move before I drowned in the weight of my own emotions. But as I turned to walk away, I felt it. His hand, light, barely there, brushing against mine. And that was the moment. That was the moment where everything shifted. It was nothing, just skin against skin, a fraction of a second. But it sent a jolt through me, something raw, something dangerous. Because he didn't pull away. And neither did I. A touch. That's all it was. But it lingered. Too long. Too much. A moment stretched beyond what it should have been. I could feel the heat of his palm, the roughness of his skin. The familiarity of someone I had known my whole life, colliding with the undeniable wrongness of what I was feeling in that instant. And in that second, my mind fractured. One half of me was screaming, "This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong." The other half? It was starving. Starving for connection, for warmth, for something that felt real. And the worst part? It wasn't just him. It wasn't just this moment. It was years of loneliness, of reaching out in the dark and finding nothing. It was the flashbacks of nights spent lying next to my husband, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the love had slipped through the cracks, wondering when I had become invisible. It was the way he used to kiss me, not in the early days, not when love was fresh and easy, but later, after the weight of time had settled in. The way his hands used to find my skin, only to withdraw like I was made of glass, like I would break if he held me too long. It was every cold glance, every silent dinner, every night I had gone to bed feeling unwanted. And now, in this moment, with my father's touch still lingering, with my body still humming from something I shouldn't have felt, all of it came rushing back. I should have walked away. That was the moment I should have stepped back, shaken off the weight of my emotions, forced myself to forget whatever this was. But I didn't. I stayed. And that changed everything. The moment passed, but it left something behind, a shift in the air, a feeling that hadn't been there before. I went to the kitchen, pretending I needed to check on something, pretending I needed distance. But I could still feel it, that tiny, fleeting touch. It was nothing and everything all at once. I turned on the stove, even though I wasn't cooking. Opened cabinets, even though I wasn't looking for anything. My hands were moving, but my mind was stuck in that moment, replaying it again and again. I told myself it was stupid, that I was reading into something that wasn't there, that I was just lonely, that this wasn't about him, it was about me, about all the years of feeling empty, of craving something I couldn't even name. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. My father stood in the doorway watching me, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" His voice was steady, calm, but there was something beneath it, something unspoken. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just lost in my head." He nodded, stepping forward, leaning against the counter. "You've been doing that a lot tonight." I let out a breathy laugh, shaking my head. "Guess it's one of those nights." Silence stretched between us. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the soft sound of rain starting against the windows. I felt his eyes on me. And for some reason, I couldn't look at him. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd see there. Afraid of what he'd see in me. "Let's sit." His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. I nodded, following him back to the living room. We sat down. The space between us felt smaller than before. I don't know if it actually was, or if it just felt that way. The lamp beside us cast a warm, low glow over the room. The kind of light that makes everything feel softer, less real. The kind of light that makes mistakes feel easier to make. I could still hear the clock ticking. It sounded louder now, like it was counting down to something. We talked. About nothing and everything. At first, it was easy. Light. But then the words got heavier. He told me about my mother. About the nights he still wakes up thinking she's next to him. About how the silence in his house feels like a ghost, following him from room to room. I told him about my marriage. Then, his hand covered mine. Not quick. Not accidental. Deliberate. Steady. My breath caught. I should have pulled away. I knew that. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt warmth. Not just on my skin, but inside me. I stared at our hands. His was bigger, rougher, but his touch was soft. Gentle. Reassuring. Comforting. That's all this was, right? Just comfort. Just two lonely souls finding solace in each other. Just two people who had been left out in the cold for too long, finally stepping into something warm. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That it was just a moment. That I was imagining the way my pulse quickened, the way my skin burned where he touched me. That this was harmless. But comfort has a way of turning into something else. Something you can't take back. Something that changes you forever. The storm outside had crept in unnoticed, slow and quiet at first. Raindrops tapped against the windows, steady and rhythmic. The occasional rumble of thunder rolled in the distance, soft but growing, like something gathering force, waiting to break. Inside, the air was thick. Heavy. The kind of heavy that sits deep in your chest, makes your breathing shallow, makes your pulse uneven. His hand was still on mine. Neither of us had moved. Neither of us wanted to. I told myself it was just a touch. That it wasn't crossing a line. That it wasn't the kind of moment that could destroy a life, that could leave scars that never fade. But deep down, I knew better. Because comfort doesn't make your skin burn. Comfort doesn't make your heart pound so loud you swear the other person can hear it. Comfort doesn't make you feel this alive after years of feeling nothing. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up, walked across the room, Put distance between us before whatever this was could become something more. But I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows, the sky breaking open with a sudden, sharp clap of thunder. And that's when it happened. I looked up at him. And he was already looking at me. His expression unreadable, but his eyes. They held something I had never seen before. Or maybe something I had never allowed myself to see. My breath hitched. His thumb brushed against my skin, just the slightest movement, so small I could have convinced myself it was nothing. But it was everything. And then, like something out of my control, something neither of us could stop, he leaned in. Or maybe I did. I don't know who moved first. I don't know if it even mattered. All I know is that suddenly, the space between us was gone. And before I could think, before I could talk myself out of it, before I could remind myself that this was wrong, that this was dangerous, that this could never be undone, our lips touched. It was soft at first. Hesitant. Like two people standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing they shouldn't jump, knowing they shouldn't take that final step, but leaning forward anyway. I could feel his breath against my skin, the warmth of his body so close to mine, the way his hands trembled slightly as they hovered at me, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to touch me, like he was waiting for me to decide for both of us. And for a moment, just a moment, I let go. I let go of the guilt. Let go of the fear. Let go of the years of loneliness, the years of reaching out and finding nothing, the years of feeling invisible. For the first time in so long, I felt wanted. I felt seen. But then a sound. A shift in the air that wasn't coming from the storm outside. The door. The faintest creak, barely there, but loud enough to make my stomach drop. My heart stopped. Slowly, so painfully, terribly slow, I turned. And that's when I saw him. Standing in the doorway. Eyes wide. Face pale. Expression shifting, confusion, disbelief, then something much worse. Horror. Pure, unfiltered horror. Silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room but drowns it. My breath was caught in my throat, trapped somewhere between shock and sheer panic. My whole body went cold, like every ounce of heat had drained from my skin, leaving nothing but ice in its place. He stood there. My husband. His figure framed in the doorway, the dim light behind him casting shadows across his face. But I didn't need to see his expression to feel what was there. I could feel it in the way the air around us shifted. The weight of realization crashing down. The way his chest rose, slow, controlled, but tight, like he was holding everything in, keeping himself from unraveling right in front of me. I wanted to speak. I needed to speak. But nothing came out. Because what could I possibly say? What words exist for a moment like this? A moment where everything you thought was hidden has been dragged into the light? A moment where you look at the person who is supposed to be your partner, your love, your life, and all you see in their eyes is something breaking? I stood frozen, my lips parted, my lungs begging for air, my mind scrambling to find something, anything, to fix this, to take it back, to make it not real. But it was too late. His eyes flicked from me to him, my father, still sitting beside me, still close enough that the space between us felt compromising, damning. Then back to me. Back to what I had done. My heartbeat was deafening. Loud, erratic, hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Still, he didn't speak. Didn't shout. Didn't demand answers. He just stood there. Looking at me. Looking through me. Like he was seeing me for the first time and hating what he saw. The clock on the wall kept ticking. The storm outside kept raging. But inside this room, inside this moment, everything had stopped. Then, without a word, he turned. And walked away. No hesitation. No second glance. Just walked away. Something inside me cracked. I felt it. Felt the way my stomach twisted, felt the way my lungs squeezed tight, felt the way my knees buckled beneath me as the weight of what I had done, what I had lost, came crashing down all at once. I collapsed onto the couch, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Because it hit me, all at once, this was it. There was no taking this back. No undoing it. No pretending it hadn't happened. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. The thing about regret is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves. At first, it's a shock, a sharp, unbearable stab right in the center of your chest. It knocks the wind out of you, leaves you gasping, desperate for air, desperate to wake up from whatever nightmare you've just fallen into. But then, it gets worse. Because after the shock fades, after the moment has passed, you realize something terrifying. It's not going away. The shame, the guilt, the ugly, suffocating weight of it all, it's settled in, burrowing deep beneath your skin, curling itself around your bones, and no matter how hard you try to shake it, no matter how much you want to run, you can't escape it. Because you can't escape yourself. I sat there for hours after he left. Didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't breathe properly. Just sat there, staring at nothing, my mind replaying the scene over and over and over again, begging for a different outcome. But it was always the same. The door creaks open. His shadow stretches across the floor. His eyes meet mine. Everything crumbles. I kept thinking, what if? What if I had pulled away sooner? What if I had never let it get that far? What if I had walked away before I lost everything? I could have stopped it. I should have stopped it. But I didn't. And now, the damage was done. My marriage, whatever was left of it, was over. And my father. God. I didn't even know what to do with that. How do you look at someone who was supposed to protect you, someone you trusted, someone who had always been a constant in your life, and know that you've ruined everything? That you crossed a line so deep, so irreversible, that there is no coming back? I told myself time would fix it. That time fixes everything. That eventually, the weight would ease, the memory would dull, the shame would fade into something manageable. But some wounds don't heal. Some wounds don't fade. Some wounds fester. And this? This was one of them. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to make a mistake like this. I used to think I understood myself. That no matter how lonely I got, no matter how broken I felt inside, I'd always know where the line was. I'd always be strong enough to step away before I did something I couldn't take back. But when you're starving for something, for connection, for warmth, for someone to see you, sometimes your mind stops thinking and your emotions take control. And by the time you realize what you've done, it's too late. Now I have to live with this. The guilt, the regret, the shame that sits in my chest like a weight I can never put down. But maybe you've been here too. Maybe you've felt what I felt, that ache in your soul, that quiet desperation for something more. Maybe you've been in a situation where your emotions got the best of you, where you let something happen that you never thought you would. And if you have, I want to hear from you. Would you have walked away? Or would you have done the same? Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe, just maybe, we can talk about it. Because the truth is, life is never as black and white as we want it to be. And if you love true, shocking stories like this, real, raw, and unfiltered, don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because this is just one of many. And trust me, there's more. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Loneliness is dangerous. It creeps in slow, like a shadow stretching across the floor, and before you realize it, it's wrapped itself around you so tight that you can't breathe. And when you're desperate, truly desperate, you'll reach for anything to make the emptiness go away. Even if it means crossing a line you never thought you'd cross. Even if it means losing everything. Even if it means becoming someone you don't recognize. Loneliness is a powerful thing. It can drive you to places you never imagined. But some places you can never return from.